She stood in front of a room full of billionaires, trembling not from fear, but from years of swallowed silence, finally reaching their limit. He called her uneducated, disposable, a girl who knew nothing beyond carrying plates and refilling glasses. But when she opened her mouth, 5 languages poured out like weapons, each word sharper than the last. And in that moment, the man who thought he owned the room realized he had just provoked a ghost from a world he could never understand. What would you do if someone humiliated you in front of everyone, not knowing you were the one person who could destroy them with nothing but the truth? Keep watching, because what happens next will make your blood boil. And then cheer. This is where everything truly began. Maya Sullivan had learned how to disappear long before she ever set foot inside the Sterling Crown. The restaurant was the kind of place where reservations were made 6 months in advance, where champagne cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week, and where the wait staff moved like shadows, present but never seen. That was exactly what Maya wanted. To be present but never seen. To exist without being noticed. To serve without being remembered. She was 24 years old. But she carried herself like someone much older. Someone who had learned too early that silence was safer than speech. Her black dress was perfectly pressed. Her hair always tied back in a neat low bun. Her expression neutral and polite. She never smiled too much. She never spoke unless spoken to. She never made eye contact for longer than necessary. In a world where the ultra-wealthy looked right through people like her, Maya had become an expert at blending into the background. But tonight felt different. Tonight the air in the dining room crackled with tension. And Maya could feel it the moment she stepped onto the floor. The maitre d' had warned the staff earlier that a very important guest was arriving. Someone who demanded absolute perfection. Someone who did not tolerate mistakes. Maya had simply nodded and went about her shift, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, moving efficiently through the room like she always did. She was carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes. When she first saw him, Marcus Hale, even his name sounded expensive. He walked into the Sterling Crown like he owned it, flanked by 2 men in tailored suits, and a woman in a dress that probably cost more than a car. Hale was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair slicked back, and a watch that glinted under the crystal chandeliers. Everything about him screamed power, money, control. Maya felt her chest tighten as she watched him settle into the largest table in the center of the room, right beneath the massive chandelier. The maitre d' personally attended to him, pouring wine, adjusting chairs, practically bowing. Hale barely acknowledged him. He was too busy talking loudly to his guests, gesturing with his hands, laughing at his own jokes. Everyone around him laughed too, even when nothing was funny. Maya stayed far away from that table. She served the quieter guests, the couples in the corners, the business partners who spoke in low tones. She kept her head down, and her movements smooth. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. One of the senior waiters, David, approached her near the kitchen doors. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly. Maya, he whispered urgently, I need you to cover Hale's table for me just for a few minutes. I spilled sauce on my shirt and I need to change. Maya's stomach dropped. David, Please, he said, desperation in his eyes. It's just water refills. You'll be fine. Just don't talk to him. Don't look at him. Just do it and get out. Before she could protest, David was gone, disappearing into the back hallway. Maya stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to walk away. But she couldn't, not without causing a scene. So she picked up a crystal pitcher of water, took a deep breath, and walked toward Marcus Hale's table. She approached from the side, moving quietly, carefully. Hale was in the middle of a loud story. Something about a yacht and a failed business deal. And his guests were hanging on every word. Maya reached for the first glass. The one closest to the woman in the expensive dress. Her hand was steady. Her movements were practiced. She poured the water without a sound. But as she moved to the second glass, Hale shifted in his seat, leaning back suddenly. His elbow knocked into Maya's arm, and a single drop of water splashed onto the sleeve of his suit jacket. Everything stopped. Hale froze mid-sentence. His eyes snapped to his sleeve. Then slowly, dangerously, up to Maya's face. The entire table went silent. The guests stared. The woman's mouth fell open slightly. Even the nearby tables seemed to quiet, sensing the shift in energy. "Are you serious right now?" Hale said, his voice low and cold. Maya's throat went dry. "I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident. Let me." Hale's voice rose, cutting through the room like a blade. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" Maya kept her eyes down. "I apologize, sir. I'll get a cloth." "A cloth?" Hale laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think a cloth is going to fix this? This is a custom Italian suit. $10,000. And you just dumped water all over it. Because you can't even hold a pitcher steady." The humiliation burned through Maya's chest, hot and suffocating. She could feel every eye in the room on her. The guests at Hale's table were watching, with a mix of discomfort and curiosity. The maitre d' was rushing over, his face panicked. But Maya couldn't move. She couldn't speak. She just stood there, frozen, as Hale leaned back in his chair and looked her up and down, like she was something disgusting he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "Look at you," Hale said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You probably didn't even finish high school, did you? You're just another uneducated girl who couldn't make it anywhere else. So now you're here carrying plates and spilling water on people who actually matter." Maya's hands tightened around the pitcher. Her breathing was shallow. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. But Hale wasn't done. "You know what the problem is with people like you," he continued, gesturing to her like she was an object. "You don't understand your place. You don't understand that there are people in this world who create value, who build empires, who change industries. And then there are people like you. The ones who serve us. The ones who are replaceable. Do you know what that word means? Replaceable." One of his guests shifted uncomfortably. The woman looked away. But Hale didn't care. He was enjoying this. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Maya. "I could have you fired right now. One word to the owner and you're done. You'll be out on the street by tomorrow, begging for another minimum wage job that you'll probably lose, because you can't even pour water without screwing it up." Maya's vision blurred. Her chest felt tight. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to apologize again, to beg for mercy. That's what she would have done a year ago. That's what she had been trained to do. Stay quiet. Stay small. Survive. But something inside her, something buried deep beneath years of silence and fear, suddenly cracked. She lifted her head. For the first time in months, Maya looked Marcus Hale directly in the eyes. And what he saw there made him pause. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was something else. Something sharp. Something dangerous. Maya set the pitcher down on the table slowly, deliberately. Then she straightened her posture, shoulders back, chin up. When she spoke, her voice was no longer soft or apologetic. It was clear. Controlled. She turned to the two Chinese businessmen sitting at the table and spoke in flawless Mandarin. Her tone was respectful but firm, and the words flowed effortlessly. "I apologize to you both for having to witness such a profound lack of basic manners from your host. This is not how business should be conducted." The words hung in the air like a slap. Hale blinked, his mouth opening slightly. The two men at the table stiffened, their eyes widening. They understood every single word. They had just heard her apologize to them for Hale's behavior. Maya turned to the woman in the expensive dress and switched seamlessly into flawless French. Her accent was perfect, her pronunciation clean and elegant. "I am sorry you have to dine with someone who confuses having money with having intelligence or class." The woman's hand flew to her mouth, shock and something like admiration flashing across her face. She clearly understood French perfectly. Maya turned back to Hale. And now she spoke in English, her voice sharp and precise. "You asked if I finished high school? I did. I also finished university. 2 degrees, actually. One in international relations, the other in linguistics. I speak 5 languages fluently: Mandarin, French, German, Arabic, and English. Which, judging by your grammar earlier, you barely manage." Hale's face turned red. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Maya stepped closer, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You called me uneducated, disposable, replaceable. But you don't know anything about me. You don't know where I came from. You don't know what I've seen. And you certainly don't know who I am." She paused, letting the silence stretch. The entire dining room was frozen. Every guest, every waiter, every person in that space was watching. "And one more thing," Maya said, her eyes boring into Hale's. "That Singapore project you're finals with these investors, the one you think is going to make you billions, you might want to double-check the environmental impact reports. Because the government's about to shut it down. I know, because I used to work for the people who make those decisions." She switched briefly into German, addressing one of the businessmen who had been silent the entire time. Her tone was professional and matter-of-fact, as she explained that the project had serious legal issues that Hale had been hiding from them. Then she spoke a few sentences in Arabic to a gentleman at the next table who had been watching the confrontation unfold. She apologized for the disturbance and assured him that the restaurant was normally much more professional than this. Finally, she returned to English, her gaze locked on Hale. 5 languages, Mr. Hale. 5 different ways to tell you that you're wrong. 5 different ways to expose your ignorance. And you didn't see any of it coming. Because you made the mistake of thinking that someone in a server's uniform couldn't possibly be smarter than you." Hale's face went white. Maya picked up the pitcher, turned on her heel, and walked away, leaving the billionaire speechless, humiliated, and exposed in front of the very people whose approval he desperately needed. Maya didn't stop walking until she reached the staff hallway behind the kitchen. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She set the pitcher down on a steel counter and pressed her palms flat against the cool metal, trying to steady her breathing. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. What had she just done? For months she had been invisible. For months she had kept her head down, avoided attention, stayed silent. And in less than 5 minutes, she had shattered that carefully constructed wall. She had spoken. She had fought back. She had revealed parts of herself she had sworn to keep buried. And it had felt incredible. Maya closed her eyes, replaying the moment in her mind. The look on Hale's face when she switched into Mandarin. The shock in his guest's eyes when she spoke French. The way his arrogance crumbled when she mentioned the Singapore project. She had seen men like Hale before. Men who believed their money made them untouchable. Men who thought they could humiliate people without consequence. But Maya knew something they didn't. Money didn't make you powerful. Knowledge did. And she had more of it than Hale could ever imagine. The kitchen door swung open, and David rushed in, his face pale and panicked. "Maya, what happened? The maitre d' is losing his mind. Hale is demanding to speak to the manager. Everyone's talking about." "I know," Maya said quietly, cutting him off. I handled it. David stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Handled it? Maya, you can't just. I did, she said, her voice firm. And I'm not apologizing. Before David could respond, the kitchen door opened again. And the maitre d' appeared, his expression a mix of fury and confusion. Maya Sullivan, he said sharply. My office. Now. Maya followed him through the narrow hallway to a small, cramped office at the back of the restaurant. The maitre d' closed the door behind them and turned to face her, his arms crossed. What on earth were you thinking? He demanded. Do you have any idea who Marcus Hale is? Do you know what kind of influence he has in this city? He could ruin this restaurant with a single phone call. Maya met his gaze evenly. He insulted me in front of an entire dining room. He called me uneducated. He threatened my job. He treated me like I was nothing. And you embarrassed him in 5 languages. The maitre d' shot back. You made him look like a fool in front of his investors. He's furious, Maya. He wants you fired immediately. Maya's stomach twisted, but she kept her expression calm. Then fire me. The maitre d' blinked, clearly not expecting that response. What? Fire me, Maya repeated. If that's what he wants, then do it. But I'm not going back out there to apologize to a man who thinks he can humiliate people just because he has money. The maitre d' stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples. You're putting me in an impossible position. I'm putting you in the position of choosing between your integrity and a bully, Maya said quietly. That's not impossible. It's just uncomfortable. For a moment, the office was silent. Then the maitre d' shook his head, letting out a long breath. Wait here, he said, and left the room. Maya sat down in one of the stiff wooden chairs, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she'd still have a job in 10 minutes. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt free. Minutes passed. Then the door opened again. And this time it wasn't the maitre d' who walked in. It was one of Hale's guests. The tall man in the expensive gray suit. The one who had been sitting to Hale's right. He closed the door behind him and looked at Maya with an expression that was hard to read. Miss Sullivan, he said, his accent faintly British, his tone polite but curious. I hope you don't mind. I asked the maitre d' if I could speak with you privately. If you're here to defend Mr. Hale. I'm not, the man said, holding up a hand. Quite the opposite, actually. My name is Richard Morgan. I'm one of the investors Hale is working with on the Singapore project you mentioned. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had thrown that information out as a weapon. A way to shake Hale's confidence. She hadn't expected anyone to follow up on it. Morgan sat down across from her, his expression serious. You said the government is about to shut the project down. How do you know that? Maya hesitated. She had already revealed too much. But something in Morgan's eyes told her. He wasn't asking out of malice. He was asking because he genuinely wanted to know. So she told him the truth. I used to work for a consulting firm that advised governments on environmental policy, Maya said carefully. I saw the preliminary reports on Hale's project 6 months ago. The environmental damage was catastrophic. The government was already preparing to block it. But Hale's lawyers were stalling. I left the firm before the final decision was made. But I know how these things work. The shutdown is coming. It's just a matter of time. Morgan leaned back in his chair, processing this. You're not just a waitress, are you? Maya gave a small, bitter smile. No. I'm not. Then why are you here? Morgan asked, genuinely curious. Why are you working at a restaurant? Instead of using your skills somewhere else? Maya looked away, her jaw tightening. Because sometimes the safest place to hide is in plain sight. Morgan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I understand, he said quietly. More than you might think. He stood, straightening his suit. Thank you for the information, Miss Sullivan. I'll be conducting my own investigation into the project. If what you've said is true, Hale is about to lose a significant amount of my money. And I don't take kindly to being lied to. Maya blinked, surprised. You believe me? Morgan smiled faintly. I've spent 30 years in business, Miss Sullivan. I've learned to recognize when someone is telling the truth. And you just humiliated one of the most arrogant men I've ever met. Using nothing but intelligence and precision. That's not something an uneducated waitress could do. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. If you ever decide to step out of hiding, he said, give me a call. I could use someone like you on my team. Maya took the card, staring at it in disbelief. Morgan nodded once, then left the office, closing the door softly behind him. Maya sat alone in the small room, the business card still in her hand. She didn't know what to feel. Relief, shock, pride. All of it swirled together in her chest. A confusing, overwhelming mess. A few minutes later, the maitre d' returned. He looked tired, but his expression had softened. Hale left, he said simply. He's not coming back. And for what it's worth, you're not fired. Maya exhaled slowly, the tension draining from her shoulders. Thank you? The maitre d' shook his head. Don't thank me. Thank whatever miracle just happened out there. Hale's investors left with him, and apparently they weren't happy. I don't know what you said to that man, but it worked. Maya stood, smoothing down her dress. I just told him the truth. The maitre d' gave her a long look, then nodded. Maybe that's all it takes sometimes. Maya left the office and walked back through the quiet hallway. The dinner service was winding down now. The dining room calmer, the guests finishing their meals. She could see David at one of the tables, expertly balancing plates. She could see the other wait staff moving smoothly through the room, doing what they did best. And for the first time in months, Maya didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Not as a waitress. Not as someone disposable. But as someone who mattered. Someone who had a voice. Someone who could fight back. She glanced down at the business card in her hand. At Richard Morgan's name printed in crisp black letters. She didn't know if she would call him. She didn't know if she was ready to step back into the world she had fled. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't hiding anymore. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths, waiting for the right moment to speak. And when they do, the world shifts in ways no one expects. Maya had spent so long being invisible that she forgot what it felt like to be seen. But now she remembered. And there was no going back. If you love the story, there are more powerful emotional tales waiting for you on this channel. Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? And what finally made you find your voice? Like, share, subscribe. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more unforgettable stories. Thanks for loving Reddit Storyteller.